Hello everyone, and welcome back to another one of my Majora's Mask project videos. Today we are making what I believe is the third mask of my collection, and thanks to our friend Slappy, we are going to be making the Bremen mask. Bremen chicken mask. Anyway, the one that you wear in Majora's Mask that has the animals follow you around. So I'm really excited to get started on this one. This one will take a lot more cutting out of the base, and yes, I will use foil and foam clay, but I'm also planning on using some 2mm foam to cut out the feathers and stuff and hope that works. I have a slight idea in mind. I'm not sure how that's going to come together as the final project, but I did want to get started today, so we will see how that goes. My little executive producer, she is helping me and making sure that I do all the things in preparation for this mask. Right, Suki? Yeah. You gonna be good? You gonna help? That's right. Yeah.
The first challenge I had to face was cutting the base of the mask and trying to figure out exactly what shape I wanted for it. I just grabbed a pencil and started sketching where I thought I wanted to cut. I did have to fix this a couple of times, but I got there in the end. I cut off the bottom half of the mask but left two little pointed sides for what I believe is the talons or extra beak bits that are included in the design. And when it was cut out, I put it against my face to see if it fit where I wanted it to.
Tall forehead.
As I just mentioned, the forehead of the mask was too tall, so I did have to grab some scissors and then cut that down to size, just so it looked more like the design. The next thing that I had to do was start working on the beak. Like the other masks before, I just grabbed some foil and started molding that into the shape of the mask. I probably should have made it a little bit thicker to begin with, but I just made up for it with foam clay later. And when the shape was formed, I then glued it to the mask. I then needed to put the foam clay over the whole thing, but first I tied the elastic to the mask just so I could put it on the mannequin foam head so it sat nicely as I molded the foam clay. It did help initially, though I did realize that the elastic would have to come off once the foam clay had been placed on the mask, because I needed to add the feathers before attaching it again. The feathers made the mask a lot wider and would have cut off where the elastic was tied onto the mask, so it made sense for me to add it a bit later, though having it on at the beginning helped when I was molding the foam clay and having it on the head. And this is what it looked like covered in foam clay. I actually wasn't very happy with it at this point, but I was trusting the process. The next thing I did was grab some 2mm foam and start to cut out some feather shapes. I made two wide bases to begin with, just so I could eyeball and have what I believe to be the full width of the mask before I planned on cutting out some other feathers. I also knew from previous projects that I need to seal the foam, especially before I paint it with any acrylic paint, so I grabbed some PVA glue and started to paint that over the foam. Thankfully, they only needed one coat each side, and PVA glue doesn't take too long to dry, so it was kind of handy and therapeutic to do after work one night. Once I had covered the base feather parts, I got started on the individual feathers. I cut out multiple rectangles of foam, sketched an almost feather shape, not completely accurate because I was going more off the game design rather than real feathers, grabbed my Stanley knife and started cutting them out. Very soon I had heaps of feathers. I don't have an exact number, I was just eyeballing it. It was at least over 20 anyway. I then grabbed the PVA glue and started to coat those individually as well. This was a very tedious task, but I knew that was what I was getting into when I decided to make them out of foam rather than buy some feathers from Amazon. Though I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments if you guys think I should have used feathers rather than foam for this. But I guess you have to see the final product to make that decision first. Soon all of the feathers were completely covered in PVA glue and left to dry. Once dry, I started to figure out exactly how I wanted to glue them, and then I covered them with a white undercoat of paint. I didn't film that part because my phone was dying and I was talking to my sisters while I was painting, but I'm sure I have enough footage of everything else for you guys. Once the paint was dry, I started to sketch some stems for the feathers. Are they called stems? I don't know. Stems. And then grabbed the Stanley knife and started to cut the feathers so they had multiple slits in the side of them, making sure that I didn't sever the stems during this part either. This was another tedious job, but I am really glad that they turned out the way they did. The cutting took forever, but once it was done, I then grabbed my heat gun to warm up the foam and attempt to give them some shape. I basically just used my hands to try and roll them, split apart some of the creases, and even used a tripod stand to roll them and give them a little bit of a curve. Now, just a note for future, they didn't exactly stay in their shape, so I did use the heat gun a few more times throughout the mask making process, but I still think it helped when I glued them down, just so I knew how they would kind of look when they were placed against the mask. This is now me grabbing the hot glue gun and gluing all of the feathers onto the base feathers, which I would then attach to the base of the mask. I left a couple of individual feathers off from being glued to the group, so when I attached them to the mask, I could add them behind and make sure everything was kind of symmetrical on each side. These are the two groups of feathers completely glued together, and then I grabbed the hot glue gun again and attached it to the mask. At this point, I was also wondering whether I should have painted the feathers individually before gluing them all together, but instead of using acrylic paint once again and hand painting them, I wanted to instead buy some spray paint. Once the hot glue was dry though, I grabbed some more foam clay to add on some eyebrows because I noticed the design made the eyebrows kind of protrude a little bit more, made the beak a little bit higher and more curved, and then also added some foam clay into the seams of the feathers and the mask just to kind of cover and connect them a little bit more. And this is what it looked like during that stage. I of course went over with some water to smooth it all down. I was hoping it kind of held shape. The next morning, everything I did the night before was dry, but I thought it needed more details. I got foam clay and made triangles around the beak, talon, and feathers because when I was looking at the design that night, I realized the feathers around the face were a little bit more pointed. I then took a trip to Bunnings and grabbed some spray paint. I also got extra colors for future masks, but that's okay. While I was at Bunnings, I left the mask in the sun to dry, so the details I added that morning would be completely dry when I got back. I then grabbed the heat gun and started to curl the feathers a little bit more.
Gotta go spray paint it now.
Once I was sure everything was dry, I grabbed the satin white paint that I bought and took it outside to begin painting the mask. I didn't record myself, but I did 3 coats of paint. The sun was very hot and definitely helped. And when I came inside, I added the elastic to the back of the feathers. This is me testing to make sure it didn't fall off, and then I started to sketch the eyes and the nose details. I was constantly checking to make sure it was kind of symmetrical. The next thing that I did was also kind of tedious. I had to grab my Stanley knife again and try and cut out the pupils within the eyes of the mask. Unlike the Mask of Truth, I wanted to be able to see through this mask when I wore it, and now that I had the complete base done, eyebrows, beak, and everything, I knew exactly where I wanted to cut out for the eyes. This is what it looks like all cut out. I also left some dots at the top for a kind of glare like the design has. And now it was time to start painting. Painting can either be really therapeutic for me or really annoying. And thankfully, I actually found it therapeutic this time. I had to mix up a yellow to add to the beak and the side talons. Though I wasn't very happy with the color to begin with, I just went with a base yellow. I also needed a black for around the eyes and red for around the pupils. After I did the eyes, the beak was done, so I went back over the beak with some darker yellow that I mixed with yellow, red, and a little bit of gold, just to give it more depth and detail. And when the red and the black of the eyes was dry, I also went back over them with a bit more of a maroon color, just like a darker red, as there's like 3 different shades of red in the eyes alone. The next thing that I did was actually grab a pencil and outline the eyes, the eyebrows, and underneath the eyes. They have some point and some shading over the eyebrows that I only thought that I could maybe do with a pencil. I didn't want to try that with paint and then ruin it because paint is not my main medium for art, but I think it turned out pretty well. The last thing that I needed to do for the painting / coloring of the mask was the feathers. Looking at the design, I realized that the feathers had grey around the outside of each individual one. I also didn't want to try my luck with paint, so I actually grabbed some eyeshadow from an old palette that I don't use that much, and I brushed them onto the outsides of the feathers. I was genuinely surprised at how well the eyeshadow actually stuck. It got caught in all of the ridges and it just added so much more depth that I was really happy with. This is one side done and one side not, so you can kind of see the difference. And then soon I got started on the other side, just basically doing the same thing. I took the eyeshadow, went around the feathers, and also went in between and behind the feathers to add some depth to the ones behind. I also added some to the foam clay triangles at the front of the feathers, just to give them a little bit more dimension, and also around the beak and the talons just for some depth there as well. And this is how it looked. Now, there was only one more thing that I needed to do. Since I cut out the eyes, I wanted to make sure that I was able to see through them, but not be seen through them. So I grabbed some more black mesh like I did with the Keaton mask, and I hot glued those behind the eye and then cut off any excess. And that was the mask done. Please let me know if you like how the Bremen mask turned out. Feel free to subscribe if you want to follow the project, and let me know in the comments what mask you guys would like to see next. Thank you all again, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye!